So my name is Stephen Gordon. I am from the Human Science Research Council, and today my talk will be Political Trust in South Africa, a Loss of Hearts and Minds. History has taught us time and time again that democracy cannot be imposed from above or without. It must develop in the hearts and minds of the people themselves. If people lose faith in the democratic system, if they lose faith in the elected government that system produces, if they lose faith in politicians, if they lose faith in political parties, if they lose faith in governments, then that system is in trouble. Ultimately, the consolidation of democracy depends on the hearts and minds of the people themselves. Democracy requires public legitimacy. It requires the support of the people. But why am I talking about hearts and minds here today? Because South African democracy is facing a grave and serious challenge. Over the last 10 years, we have witnessed a decline in political trust, a loss in public confidence in the key political institutions that govern our country. People have lost faith in our democratic system. People have lost faith in the elected officials of that system. Communities are becoming deeply frustrated with politics as usual, deeply frustrated with the political status quo. But it is not enough to bear witness to these events. We must understand them. We must understand how far public confidence in political institutions has fallen, and we must understand when it started to fall. To answer these questions, I will not rely, as many are wont to do, on my own experience with governments. Instead, I will rely on objective, scientific, independent public opinion data. I will present this data to you, and then I will allow you to draw your own conclusions about what this data means and how it should be interpreted. Taking a step back, I want to talk to you about the data I will be presenting. My talk draws on the South African Social Attitudes Survey, a repeat cross-sectional survey series conducted annually by the Human Science Research Council. This survey is designed not only to be nationally representative, but provincially representative. As I'm giving my talk in the Northwest, I will be presenting data not only on South Africa as a whole, but on the Northwest as well. Every year, SASIS, the South African Social Attitudes Survey, interviews 3,000 people. I will draw on 16 rounds of SASIS, on more than 45,000 interviews, to tell you how public attitudes in South Africa have changed over the last decade and a half. So the first question that we're going to be talking about is, are South Africans satisfied with how their democracy is working? We present the data here. The blue line is the national average. The orange line is the Northwest. As you can see from the graph, public satisfaction with democracy is half what it was in 2005, in 2014. From 2014 to 2017, it continues to decline. In 2018, only 32% of adult South Africans were satisfied with the way democracy was working. The trends in the Northwest mirror the South African average all the way up until 2015, when people in the Northwest become more and more negative on this issue. In 2016, we saw a 22-point drop in satisfaction with the way democracy was working. A substantial and deep decline. Only 14% of Northwesterners were satisfied with how democracy was working in 2017. With the change of Premier, however, we see a mild uptick in satisfaction with democracy in 2018. We also see this nationally with the change of administration. However, as we can see, the decline in satisfaction with democracy is deep and resolute. Much of the reason we have observed a significant decline in satisfaction with democracy lies with the economy. One of the best ways to look at how people think about the economy is to ask them this question: are you satisfied with the general economic situation at present? As you can see, beginning in 2010, we saw a significant and strong decline in satisfaction with the general economy. In the Northwest, we see a particularly deep decline in satisfaction with the general economy. In 2007, satisfaction was at 36%. In 2017, satisfaction in the general economy was at 12%. Again, a substantial decline. In the last year, we've seen a stabilization of this decline, but the public mood is still dour. This should not surprise us. In the last few years, the economic news has been dominated by negative and sobering stories of decline, of unemployment, of significant and substantial problems. Now, we have observed a substantial decline in public satisfaction with how democracy is working. Let us turn our attention now to public satisfaction with local government, an important bedrock institution in our country. We asked people if they trusted their local government at present, presenting data from 1998 to 2018. Beginning in 2004, we see a substantial decline in public trust in local government, particularly in the Northwest. In 2004, 55% of adult South Africans trusted their local government. In 2018, it was only 28%. The drop-off in the Northwest has been even steeper, particularly after 2013. Currently, only 16% of Northwesterners say they trust their local government. A substantial and significant decline that has only grown worse over the last few years. The loss of trust in local government brings us to a significant and vexing issue. It brings us to the issue of corruption and state capture. When people lose faith in their local government's ability to act meaningfully and honestly in their community, we must ask questions about corruption. Now, one of the easiest ways to look at the issue of corruption is to look at satisfaction with the current political leaders, the people who staff our government and the people who staff the political parties here in South Africa. We asked South Africans how satisfied they were with current political leaders in the country. And we have seen that satisfaction levels were low in 2011 when we first asked this question, and became even lower in 2017. They were 30% in 2011 and dropped down to 15% in 2017. The drop-off in the Northwest was even steeper. In 2017, only 5% of adult residents in the Northwest were satisfied with the current political leadership that they had. Beginning in 2018, we see a mild reversal of this trend, with the change in premiership, as well as the change of national administration. We see a small uptick in public sentiment towards political leaders in South Africa. Now, earlier I mentioned the important issue of corruption, particularly of state capture. Corruption scandals have dominated our national news cycle for years now. Corruption is considered a major obstacle to economic and social development, as well as the consolidation of democracy. One of the ways we can measure public concern about corruption is we can ask people, what are the 3 top challenges facing South Africa today? Then we can look at the share mentioning corruption as a top challenge. This graph presents the percentage mentioning corruption as one of the 3 most important challenges facing South Africa. Now you see, in 2003, only 9% of the country thought that corruption was a top challenge. Only 9. Things changed significantly after that, particularly beginning in 2009. People start to see corruption as a more and more important challenge. In 2017, 30% of the national population described corruption as a top challenge facing our country. Corruption is now considered more important than race relations, than service delivery, than education in the minds of everyday South Africans. What this statistic points to is a desire amongst ordinary people for a responsive, accountable government, for a government that will address the needs of the people honestly, and for decisive anti-corruption measures to be taken. Now, in this talk, I presented you a lot of data, many of it quite grim and dour data. We must ask at this moment, what does this data mean? And what has it meant in other contexts? The challenges facing us today have been faced by other advanced democracies, by France, by Britain, by Brazil, by the United States. Declining trust in political institutions, in politicians, and democracy. In those contexts, we've seen the rise of popularism, the rise of an angry and resentful popularism, the rise of demagogues who stoke social and ethnic division, who abuse democratic norms and consolidate power in their own hands. Will this happen in our beautiful country of South Africa? I myself, I do not know. But the trend is worrying. But there's another concern, another result of this decline in public faith and public trust that I want to present to you today. One more statistic that I want to talk about, something that has me worried. South Africa is a country of protest action, and has always been a country of protest action. Since the mid-2000s, however, we've seen an escalation in protest action, a growth in the use of particularly violent and disruptive protests to change the system, to get things done both at a local as well as a national level. We at the HSRC were interested in how ordinary people thought about protest action. So we included some questions in 2016 to ask people whether they viewed different types of protest action as acceptable or not, and whether they viewed different types of protest action as effective or not. And we looked at peaceful protests, disruptive protests, and violent protests. These questions were identical to a similar set in 1995. Let us look at the results. What we can see between 1995 and 2016 is a growth in popular support for violent protest action. In 2016, 12% of respondents told field workers that they saw violent protest action positively. 21% told field workers that they saw violent protest action as effective, as an effective way, as a proficient way to bring about change in our country. As you can see from this graph, this is a marked increase from what was observed in 1995. What this data represents is worrying, because it shows that people are more willing to embrace violent protest action now than they were more than 20 years ago. This should worry us all. Successive governments in South Africa over the last 10 years have struggled to maintain and improve public trust, public faith in democratic institutions and in government institutions. As I've said, this is worrying. International research will tell you that once the public loses faith in government, in democracy, it's very hard to get that faith back. It requires a lot of work, it requires a lot of time. The trends on violent protest action that I've shown you are also worrying. They are quite disturbing. The Northwest itself has had a particularly difficult history in recent years with protest action. As we move forward to the 2019 May elections, we must consider the trends I've shown you today. What the people want, what the people of South Africa want, is transformative governance, governance that delivers for them, governance that responds to their needs. If we were to address the decline in public trust, the loss in public confidence, then we need to foster transformative governance, a governance that speaks to the people. Although the messages I have told you today are grim, or perhaps somewhat sober and depressing, they are important messages. And the substantial decline that we have observed in this talk must be considered and action must be taken. Thank you very much.